Yes, as for whetting the appetite, my appetite for the Summa Sacra was whetted 17 years ago, and I've been waiting for somebody else to publish it, do all the hard work of translating the Latin, etc., and nobody did. So finally, I gave up and decided to do it myself, which is what I've done. Okay, so let's see, what does the title actually mean? Well, sacred magic is straightforward, and Mr. Ganelli definitely thought of magic as sacred, and issued various warnings about being light-hearted with it and so forth. So the full title can mean a number of things, because summa is one of those lovely flexible Latin words. It could mean the summit of sacred magic. I like that. Or the whole of sacred magic. But in the end, I settled, probably for commercial reasons, for the Compendium of Sacred Magic. And my collaborator on this, Daniel Clark, has helped a lot with translation, finding the manuscripts and getting decent copies of them. And that was a bit of a nightmare. Anyway, so here we go. Summa Sacred Magica, the Compendium of Sacred Magic. Let me just go down a page. Right. So it is the oldest, definitely the largest, and the most complete text of grimoire magic. It was written in 1346 by a practicing magician, not by a scholar or a church person, but a practicing magician who considered magic a sacred art. So let's have a look at it. So this is the actual manuscript, and it's been beautifully bound and reinforced with metal on the corners, and has a very strong spine. You can see that whoever bound it wanted it to last for a long time. It's not one of these scrappy, let's stitch it together quickly bindings. And there's the big date, 1346. So let's open it up and look inside. So these are the first two pages that I looked at, because they are two of the three contents pages. And once I'd read through this, I was hooked, because so many of the topics in there appear to and do answer questions which modern or more recent grimoires don't seem to. You can see at the bottom the library stamp, and it resides in the library of the what was then a separate state called Kassel, which is where it's been for the last 400 years. And during that time, I think very few people have actually read it. So this is a rare book and needed to be published. So a few facts. It's almost 700 years old. It's been beautifully and carefully written in Latin. If you to look back at the previous page, you can see that the scribe who worked on this worked hard, because the number of words is somewhere around about the 200,000 mark. And anybody who's ever written a book knows that 200,000 is a hell of a big, large number of words. The binding shows how well cared it was, and it passed through the hands of a number of famous magicians. So Ganelli himself, Berengarius Ganelli, was the author, and he in his lifetime was an acknowledged magician, so much so that the year after he'd written this book, he was arrested for using magic against some local, I don't know, some local pompous guy. He won the case and went on, but in the court, and there's a record of what was said, it is very clear that Ganelli was a practicing magician, not just an armchair magician. So it disappeared for a while, and then Johannes Trithemius, who was a high church guy, but one who secretly was much more interested in magic than hymn singing. He wrote a book called the Antipalus Maleficarum, which listed all of the 103 books on magic that he'd managed to put together for the place that he ruled. He was the abbot of I can't quite remember, but anyway, he was an abbot. And in the library, there were a lot of very rare books, and 103 of them were on magic. So he wanted to publish a catalogue to tell everybody else what he had. And he realized that if he did and said, I have accumulated these books on magic and I put them in the library, etc., he would be in real trouble with the church. As an abbot, he had a certain amount of protection, but perhaps not enough to survive that. So what did he do? When he was writing the Antipalus, he criticized every single book. This is a horrible book of obscene, this, that, and the other. This is a wicked book. This is so on and so forth. So when people read the Antipalus now, you would be convinced that Ganelli was fervently against magic. But that was his very clever protection, because if anybody accused him, he could say, look, I've been criticizing these books, so no harm there. Anyway, so after Trithemius, this volume was sold up, and Dr. John Dee managed to acquire it. So that's rather good, because Dee understood these things and wanted to preserve it and started to use the magic in it. But as it happened, he either ran out of money or got into a spot of bother, and he had to sell it to the Landgrave of Hesse, or Hesse-Cassel. And the Landgrave was like the local ruler or lord, not quite the level of a king, but still fairly powerful, who bought this from Dee. And what did he spend? How much did he pay Dee? Well, we don't know, but we do know that Dee immediately went out and bought himself a large carriage and a team of horses. So in those days, that was quite a lot of money. And his excuse was that he had to get back to England, and so he wanted to travel in some kind of style. Although Dee actually had one carriage for himself and one carriage for his books. I can relate to that. Anyway, so he sold it to the Landgrave. The book was put into the Landgrave's library, and 420 years later, it's still there. So this, as a grimoire, is unique. It's definitely the first grimoire that actually credited the real author, Berengarius Ganelli, rather than attributing it to Solomon the king or Merlin or any other famous magician or priest or whatever. Ganelli put his name on it very clearly by him. And what Ganelli did was he brought together many of the magical source texts of Solomonic and Grimoire tradition as they were known in the 13th century. So the Key of Solomon would have been there. The other things that he had in his collection are a series of 5 or sometimes 7 books written by Solomon. So you think, is that Solomon the Hebraic king? And no, it's not. It's very clearly a Solomon who lived in the 12th century, possibly somewhere near the bottom of France. But anyway, these are the sources from which Ganelli derived his knowledge of magic. So that's interesting, because maybe one day I will find those source books, but somehow I doubt it. Anyway, because this Solomon was a 12th century Solomon, identified as such and not the king of Israel, that probably puts the lie to a lot of other books which came later and just said they were written by Solomon. So I first of all got hold of a digital copy of the book and realized, oh my God, it's thousands of pages long, 200,000 words, and it's written in very tiny Latin. What you can see on the screen there is blown up. But I decided to translate it and publish it. And it was only later that I discovered that there were various problems with that, but we won't go into that. And so on the right is the front cover of the volume that has just been published, but which is floating somewhere in a container ship on its way to London and another container ship on its way to Los Angeles, because they're not in the same direction, so I have to ship two different ways. So where is it now? So the first, now we go back to the word book. The actual manuscript is divided into 5 books. The first 2 have been printed and bound, but they're currently delayed by shipper action. Well, actually, to be more honest, it's the action of the Houthis who are bombing ships passing up the Red Sea, so that about 20% is getting through. So I still don't know quite where my container is. Anyway, it's floating somewhere between Singapore and both London and Los Angeles. So we moved the publication date to the 30th of January, and I apologize to Watkins for the 30th of November date, which would have been workable under normal circumstances. Right. So as I worked on this, I realized that for some reason this manuscript does not seem to want to be published. So Trithemius owned it in 1508, but he didn't publish it, but he valued it highly. Dee was forced to sell this manuscript in either 1586 or probably 1589, despite wanting desperately to take it back to Mortlake. So why was he desperate? Because he took out of it a number of diagrams which subsequently have become part of Enochian magic. In fact, a lot of material inside the Summa Sacra have become dispersed into other people's types of magic, etc. Anyway, in 2007, Damaris Gehr transcribed it. Transcription is hard work, but she copied the whole thing in Latin, and now it should be in a printed form of Latin, but it's not. She tried several times to publish it, but failed. So she planned to publish it in 2011, but didn't happen. 13 years later, the university blocks her transcription and nobody can see it, which made my task a lot harder. And then in 2010, the Warburg Institute and the University of Basel, or is it Basel, got together to publish it. And they were definitely going to publish it in 2011. And they got funding from the Swiss National Science Foundation. So if that had happened, it would have been fun to see that science has funded magic, but it didn't happen. So despite those heavy-duty academic backers and serious funding, nothing happened. After waiting another 13 years, I decided to publish it myself, but all sorts of difficulties were put in my way. But I'm a persistent sort of bloke, and so I've got the first 2 books published. Now, a little bit about the author. I don't know his dates, but I'm guessing that it would be around about 1300 to 1360. He was almost certainly a Catalan, and he lived in the Balearic Islands, the great Spanish party place, and in a castle in a village near Perpignan. Now, I looked for the castle, couldn't find it, but I did find a village with the same name. I looked around carefully, but there was no demolished castle nearby, but I guess that's where it probably was. Ganelli was definitely fluent in Latin. but probably also Hebrew and Greek. And then I wondered, what is a guy living in Perpignan doing, knowing Arabic? And with a little bit more research, I realized that Raymond Lull, who was also a Catalan and who had other parallels with Ganelli and who definitely knew both magic and Arabic, at some stage lived in the same area. So I wouldn't be surprised if either he'd stirred up interest in Arabic or maybe even taught Arabic to Ganelli, but that I can't confirm. Right, so now let's talk about magic. We've had enough history. So Ganelli's definition of magic was, magic is the science of restraining evil and benevolent spirits by the name of God, by its own names, and by the name of other worldly things. So what he's saying is that magic's true basis is clearly stated, and it's on the first page of the manuscript, as commanding spirits using specific names, and that the spirits are then capable of performing the magic. Because the things that are usually attributed to magic are not things that humans can actually do. Maybe there's some at the lower level, but some of the really magical things, like invisibility, are not normally doable by humans. So there's no mention of parts of the brain, as Crowley would have said, or willpower, or special initiations. As far as Ganelli is concerned, it was just a question of knowing the names and using the method. So based on this grimoire, basic to this grimoire, the secret names of the angels, the winds, regions of earth, the divisions of the abyss, the sea, water, fire, and their associated angels. So it's fairly physical, down-to-earth stuff. So the Summa contains dozens of angelic and god names. So I've organized these in 25 additional tables so that they're easy to find and look up. And those of you who've been watching my work over the last 30 years will remember the complete magician's tables, where I went a bit mad and tabulated everything I could find that was involved with magic. And so I did the same here. And so they're in the appendix at the end of the volume, sorted and listed in a way that is easy to follow. So some of the tables, the magical names of the days of hour and night. Now, we're all used to seeing grimoires which start with the magical names of the hours of the day and of the night, because remember, there are 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of the night, and each one has a separate name. But the Summa goes a lot further, and it gives one set for spring, one set for summer, one set for autumn, and one set for winter. That's a lot of names. But as Ganelli says, if you use the right name at the right time, then you get the paths. And so things then work a lot better. So those are tabulated. Other people have said to me, well, how do I know what's the first day of spring? How do I know what's the first day of summer? Well, one answer to that is astronomical, but the answer that Ganelli gives, he dates each season as starting on the 24th day. You've probably got to adjust that by 12, but anyway, he's very precise about his seasonal divisions. Then he gives the names of days and nights of the week, so that's 14 more names. Then the names of the months, then the names of the zodiacal signs. And you begin to think, what is all this about? And the answer is, like with a lot of magic, if you actually get permission from the gatekeepers, then it becomes a lot easier. And there are gatekeepers in time and in space. And then he gives names of the gatekeepers for the earth, the sea, the abyss, water and fire. So of all the elements, only water and fire. He doesn't go into earth and metal as the Chinese do. Then, of course, the names of the planets are important, and for each planet, there are several secret names. So if you wanted to do a Saturnian operation, you do it on a Saturday in the first hour or the 15th hour. But you would also do well to open that hour using the correct name, which of course is in the book. Then there are angels of the planets and spirits of the celestial spheres. And then he does something a bit more physical, which is the names of the winds. Now, I have not seen mention of winds in other grimoires, but I have seen in Athens the Tower of the Winds, which of course has got 8 different entrances. And engraved in the stone are quite interesting depictions of the spirits of the winds coming from that direction. And then he gives cardinal directions, 7 metaphysical ones. Why 7? Well, if you think there's north, south, east, and west, that's 4. And then you've got another 4 directions, southwest, southeast, northwest, northeast in between. But one of those doesn't have its name, and that is the northeast. And for a long time, I wondered, why has the northeast been let out from this table? Why are there 7? Well, the simple answer is, well, 7 because there are 7 planets. But it's more subtle than that. So during the time I lived out in Asia, I got to meet some Chinese magicians, and so I got interested also in Chinese magic, and was surprised to see that there are considerable parallels between it and Western magic. And one of the Chinese indications is that the northeast is the demon gate. So I figured, well, that could very well be why it doesn't have attributions of archangel and angel names. And so maybe it's the demon gate universally, not just in China. Anyway, that's a separate discussion. Then there's the angel of the 13 months. And of course, the months here are moon months, not calendar months, because magic is based on real things like the real winds, the transition of the moon from one month to the other in 29 days is not the same as the 30 and 31 day of the normal Western calendar. So for magic, you need to use a lunar calendar. And then there's multiple listings of angels, because at each point you may have got the okay from the gatekeepers, but then you also need to ask the angels for assistance. Or at least it's a good idea if you do. And then there are the angels of the lunar days and the angels of the 7 heavens. The 7 heavens are each of the planets plus the 8th, going outwards from the Earth, starting with Mercury and finishing up with Saturn. Because, of course, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto could not be seen in the past, and so they don't have any magical associations. Modern astrologers tend to make use of them, but I've never been very convinced by that. And 9 kings of the air, and then the 12 demon princes, who I believe are really the Greek archons. And then there's seals for the land and the air. Okay. Now, timing is important, but it's not astrological timing. So, having woken up on Facebook recently, there's a lot of stuff about what is effectively astral magic, astral or astrologic magic. And there's a couple of good practitioners on there explaining it. but it's a separate system. It's not the same as grimoire magic. It's not the same as Solomonic magic. So, although the Summa gives the secret names of the hours, the days of the week, the months, the seasons, etc., and you see them repeated in grimoires like the Heptameron, these names are not really associated with astrology, and they're not just of antiquarian interest, because these names have to be or should be used during the process of invocation and evocation. If you use the right names in the right place, life becomes a lot easier. Timing. So planets and zodiac are, of course, important, and but they are used through the names of their ruling angels, because a planet is just a physical lump of stone, etc., and the zodiac are just imprecise markings in the sky. But each of them does have a ruling angel, and the ruling angel is sufficiently real to be able to work on and through them. So these names of the ruling angels are not just decorative, but they form part of the permission-giving chain to ensure successful invocations. So one of the things that modern would-be magicians do is they rush straight into trying to call the spirit. But in fact, what they need to do is go through a series of layers, checking out the timing of the zodiac, etc. And when all of these gatekeepers are okay and the permission has been given, then you can call upon the spirit that you want, and it will come, because its path is clear then. So the Summa is divided up by season. And I thought season, that's very imprecise. But Ganelli actually defines it by specific days. In his case, the 24th of 4 different days throughout the year. Sitting here in London, the commencement of winter didn't feel like a single day, but it's definitely here. Okay, but there's no consideration of aspects, houses, rays, or any typical astrological technology. That is over on the other side with astral and image magic. If anybody wondered why there are 2 different strands, it works like this. Ceremonial magic with demons and angels came through from Greece, and with the collapse of the Byzantine Empire, it came to the West. Whereas astral magic came through translation done in Spain, but that's a long story, so we won't go there. Now, there are many parts of the Summa which have been abbreviated or dumbed down into the grimoires which remain in circulation today. The fact is that a grimoire is mostly the notes of a particular magician who will write down the things that he does not remember easily. Some magicians will write more, some will write less. This is why you get big differences between one grimoire to another, and some grimoires that just don't work. But a lot of the information in grimoires comes from the Summa. Right, so have a look at the left side of the screen. And this is a page out of the Summa's manuscript. And believe me, it's not easy to read. The scribe, or maybe it was Ganelli, has written the same letter the same way throughout, so at least it's consistent. But because manuscript parchment was very expensive in those days, he's used every gap possible, even by enclosing the illustration in more text. Very clever, but rather annoying when you're reading it. However, what are we seeing here? We're seeing the origin of the sigillum die, or the sigillum emet. And of course, when Dee saw it, he made copies, and so his Stigulum Amat has been taken originally from the Summa, which is why I was shocked when I read that he'd actually sold the manuscript to the Landgrave of Hesse, and I assume that it was a matter of desperation rather than just making a few bucks. The illustration on the right is from Dee's papers, or Ashmole's paper, I can't remember which. And you can see that there's a little bit of damage in the top left-hand corner. And you can easily restore those damaged letters by looking back at the original, which is the Summa page on the left. Now, if you're paying attention, you will see that top right-hand corner, there's 104, which is the S. Cassell's librarian number. But above that, there's Liber 4, folio 22. Every single page has got its Liber or book and its folio number. And who did that? Dee did. He went through, not caring for the fact that it's a very rare manuscript, and wrote up the book and folio number on every page, which is very convenient because it acts like a very good index. Right. As well as, I mean, there are a number of things that have been derived from this. A lot of the Hebrew tables, which Agrippa put in his books 300 years later, are done in Latin, are done in Hebrew, are done in Arabic, and are done in Greek by Ganelli. So if you didn't know one of those languages, you can always use the other table and get the same results. And what were these tables used for? Well, for generating or checking spirit names. But also, if you look on the right-hand side, there's the key to the meaning of each line. Nobody in any later grimoire that I can remember ever put that in. So those tables are not usable. But this table gives you the clue as to what the lines mean, how you can use them. We won't go into that because if I get around to teaching the Summa, then I will explain that in detail. Right, so the basic machinery of magic is the spirits, or if you want to call them demons and angels, etc. But let's just say spirits for convenience. And so the list of spirit names is a key part of every grimoire. And in Chinese magic, it's referred to as the register of spirits. And so I'm going to call it that now. And it's most important. And many of the names in the register of spirits in the Summa appear later in grimoires like the Goetia. Some spirits drop out of the list, possibly because they were not obedient or didn't work, and others get added. But the names, the ranks, etc., are repeated fairly accurately. Now, interestingly, we can understand why the name is needed, because if you're calling somebody, you need to know what their name is. The rank is helpful because then you know how you can threaten that spirit by somebody higher up in the hierarchy. But it's also useful to know the appearance. Now, some people will say, oh, but the spirit can change its appearance. But the fact is, most spirits will turn up in their accepted form after a bit of showing, trying to frighten you or whatever. Then they'll settle down and they'll look like what is usually recorded about them. So appearance is much more important than perhaps modern grimoires give it. Okay, so here we've got, that's out of the Summa. It's a list of spirits. You can see some that you must recognize, like Astaroth, a big one, or Bilas, And then there's a number that look like spirits that you know and others that you've never seen before. But these all come from the southern quarter because spirits are directional as well. Remember, you're evoking a spirit, and stand with your back to where it's going to come from. Okay, now equipment. So in the Arabian Nights and in much Arabic literature, the big thing about Solomon was his ring. And now we're talking about Solomon the king. And it was said that if you had the ring, then you could control the spirits. And there's some truth in that. The Summa gives 4 different rings. The diagram there is just a very simplified version of the first ring. And you can see that it is both with a pentagram and also with a hexagram. But there's much more to it, and the way of making it and consecrating it is quite detailed. Because the idea is that once you've done it properly, it will help you command the spirit. Right, another part of the practice is the circle on which you stand, but there's also the table on which you work. Modern magicians don't seem to frequently have tables of practice, but I think it's an essential piece of the equipment, and one that you must treat with respect. So here's the page out of the Summa, and you can see how detailed it's drawn. We all might have some problem reading the text, but everything is written pretty clearly. So, for example, if you look on the right in the center is Deus, God, and then the very center is Yod He Vav He, and then on the left is Allah. Ooh, that's interesting. So, because Ganellis was in an area which observed 4 different languages, he even included Allah in there. And the angels and so forth around the side, some of them will be familiar to you, some of them will not be. But the key to this whole thing is the strip which runs around the outside. And if you look closely, you can see that the right-hand side A to Z, so that's the Latin alphabet, with a few differences, like there's not UVW, but just one character for U, V, and W, because W is definitely a later addition. And on the bottom is the Hebrew alphabet, which runs from the right to the left. The first character is the old way of writing Aleph, and then you can see Beth, and then Gamel's got rather a big bottom, Daleth, He, Vav, Zain, Teth, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mama, etc. And finally, finishing with Teth at the end. So that alphabet is A to T, our alphabet is A to Z. On the top is the Greek alphabet, and it goes from alpha on the left right across to the right-hand side, and then 2 little characters which don't correspond with letters fall after the omega on the right. And then, so I understand all 3 of those, and then on the left is the Arabic, which I can't claim to have a firm grasp of, so that the spirits can communicate in any one of those languages. So that's interesting, because that will tell us perhaps where some of the spirits come from. Okay, so now let's clean the table up. And there we are. This is a cleaned up version of that. And notice that the 4 god names are Allah, Deus, Theos, and Eloi, with Yod Havav He in the middle. And then the shortened form Yahweh, which is another way of saying the 4-lettered name. And then in the corners, you've got the Yava, which I just mentioned, Shade on the bottom right, Anora bottom left, and Agla on top right. And then in from there are archangels, which we don't need to go into. And around the corners are the directions, some of which you might have seen if you're reading Liber Juratus, but we'll come back to that. Okay, and this is my version of this table being used in practice. You can see the areas that are shaded out correspond with the entities that are being used. And then, of course, Dee copied it. He copied the idea. He did a table with letters around the outside, but instead of using 4 alphabets, he turned it all into the Enochian alphabet, which are the letters that come from the Bohr Academia. The 7 squares and circles are, of course, planetary, and they're fixed, or they're not fixed, so they can be moved around, and then the tablet of union in the center. So you can see that Dee used a substantial amount of the stuff that he found in the Summa, and so he must have been heartbroken to have to sell it. Okay, now there's another pattern which does not appear in later grimoires, only the fragments of it, which took me quite a while to figure out. But here we go. So it's the thrones, or if you like, the seats of Tartarus. And this diagram is a key to the directions, which is useful in evocation, and the key to the hierarchy. So first of all, you can see it's north, south, east, and west on the top, bottom, left, and right. And if you look at the northeast, you will see that it's got a question mark there because there is no seat name for it. I thought at one stage it might be Cor Draconis, but I think that's not true anymore. So the names in bold are the names of the seats. So at the top in the middle is the seat of Apologia. In the bottom is the seat of Baldasciensis. On the left is the seat of Pulmachia, and on the right is the seat of Berengarius. And then Floriget and Genealogia are the southwest and southeast seats. And the northwest is Frigicat. So if you're reading Peterson's translation of the Juratus, you will see some of these names appearing. And so now you've got the plan, so you know where they actually are. And then in each of these 9 cells, you have the ruler, the kings. So you'll be familiar with Orions in the east, and you'd expect Occidens in the west, but in fact it's Paimon, and Amaimon in the south, and Egin in the north. So we won't go into the rest of that, but it's very useful to know who's where. Okay, we just move on. Now, this plan is useful because it helps to explain some of the evocations in other later grimoires. So here I've taken the first conjuration out of the Goetia, which is a bit disorganized. But once you know the plan of the thrones, then the meaning of the evocation becomes clear. So to call forth any of the aforesaid spirits, I invoke and conjure you, Spirit N, whatever your name is. Then being armed with power from the Supreme Magistracy, I strongly command you by Berengarius, Baldasciensis, Pulmachia, and Apologia. So what are those words? Well, if you just flip back here, you can see that he's talking about the various directions. And this is a seriously important key to magic, and it happens at the front of the first goetic invocation. But most people who use it would just read those names and think, what the hell, who are these? So now you know. You go back to the Summa, and you can find out where they are located and what are their significance. And I've written more about it in the book. And the Genioli Acadae, which are just the ministers of the Tartarian seats and the chief prince of the seat of Apologia in the 9th region. So where is that? So we go back and check. Where's Apologia? Here. So it's a northerly direction in the 9th region. I'm not going to confuse you with regions, but that is important as well. I exercise and powerfully command you, Spirit, in and by him who said the word, and it was done, and by all the holy and most glorious names of the Most High and True God. And it goes on from there. But now you're in possession of what is it talking about? And you can see that it's concentrated on the Apologia direction. And then it says, minister the Tartarian seat. So what is Tartarus? So that's Tartarus. And that's usually translated as hell, which is not right. Hell is a Jewish or Christian thing where bad boys and girls go to. Tartarus is not for humans. It's for other entities. It's for the home of the spirits that you might be calling. So there you've got the plan of Tartarus. Now, those of you who are a bit more computer literate than me will have seen that there's been an increase in the buildings and features of Tartary or Tartarus. This has got nothing to do with what we're talking about here, but fascinating nevertheless. Okay, so this is just one little example of how going back to the Summa gives you the answer, what the hell is this one actually about? So then another thing that's missing from most modern grimoires, and by modern I mean those that have been published in the last 200 or 300 years, are the senior demons. And the reason for this is that you didn't want to be caught by the Inquisition carrying a book which had these names at the top of the first page. So they cut them out, they edited them out. And typically the three senior demons were Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Satan. Some of the better grimoires simply say LBS. And for a long time, I and David Rankin didn't quite know what LBS was, but it became obvious that it was Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Satan. And the reason for that is that magic is hierarchical. You need to go down the scale, using the senior demons to compel the next ones down, to compel the minor demons to actually do the job. And if you know how that works and you word it correctly, it will work. So there we are. There's the three that are missing from a lot of the current grimoires. Okay, now, what do you do with the senior demons? Well, then you need their seal. So these are straight out of the manuscript and blown up, because on the page they're about 1/10 of an inch high. And those are three of the seals of Satanas or Satan. And if we have any devoted Christians in the listening audience, you will probably think this is not a good idea. But I am more into actually showing what is there rather than censoring it. So there you go. Now, another thing that is in the Summa, which has fallen out of most of modern grimoires, are 9 or possibly 10 talismans, which are called the Candaries. And I've done a blow up from the manuscript so you can actually see that they're neatly drawn and they don't look like any other talismans you've ever seen. So what I've done is I've selected this one here, the fourth one, and I've blown it up, and there it is. So it's the fourth Candari. And why? Well, the interesting thing about this particular one is it binds the spirits of the air. Although a lot of spirits are seen as existing between the moon and the earth, these are specifically of the air elemental. Now on this, you can see it's quite straightforward. You've got the four directions: Oriens meaning east, Occidens meaning west, Meridies, and whatever the other one was, which I can't remember. And in the middle is the seal itself. Now, if you look at it carefully, you will see that it's made of 5 or 6 letters, U's and B's on the right, big A on the left, and we won't go into what the other letters are. So it's quite a precise thing. And if you look back here, you can see this has got a P here and a few other things, and these have significance, but we can't get into that. And the Candaries are very useful seals. Again, we're not going to get into it, but this is here in the Summa. The other thing that is much more extensive in the Summa than it is in later grimoires is the Shemhamphorash. Now, a lot of you will know what the Shemhamphorash is. It's a Hebrew word. It's made up of Shem, which is Hebrew for name, Ham, and Forash. So we won't go into that because that's very complicated. But a number of these Shemhamphoraches make up tables, and the tables can be used in ritual magic. The one that you will all be familiar with is the Shemhamphorash with 72 angels, and it's drawn from 3 verses in the Bible, Exodus 14, verse 19 to 21. The other Shem tables, which are more complicated, come from other parts of the Bible or from the Apocrypha or from Jewish sources. And these are used to, no, I won't go there. That will get us into a long conversation. But it's quite a form of magic by itself, part of the Solomonic tradition. You might ask me, where does the knowledge in the Summa come from? And it comes from the 12th century Solomon, not the Jewish king. And he wrote 5 books on evocation, each of which is called Magica. Magica 1, Magica 2, Magica 3, Magica 4, Magica 5, and possibly 6 and 7. And he quotes it in detail, like he will say from Magica 5, verse this or whatever. So you know that he's not just making it up, and that he's actually sourced it from a higher and older source. I'm not pretending that I know where these books are, because I don't. And I don't think I want to go and publish them if I do find them, because the Summa Sacra has been a lot of work. The other master that Ganelli quotes is Tos, who's Greek master, and he is attributed in several keys of Solomon. There's a key of Solomon by Tos. And Tos is obviously short for something else. Some people have suggested it's Trithemius, Dr. Trithemius, Trismegistus, but I don't believe that. And then there's Honorius the Theban, and I say the Theban so that you know that he comes from Greece and not from Egypt. And his book is Liber Juratus, and so Liber Juratus is quoted. And then there's Liber Ratiolis. So those are the sources. Now, if you look at Golden Horde's book list, you'll see that we have published a fairly comprehensive translation of Liber Ratiolis and some stuff on Liber Juratus, because it was being pointed to until I got all the way down to the Summa. So the four languages, they're the ones that I've already mentioned. So, the four kings of the directions, some modern or more recent grimoires put Oriens as the East, and Oriens is just a Latin word for East. And so I always thought that must be a confusion. But that's because the name is really Oriens, so some spirit from the East. In the south, it's a Maimon. In the west, it's Paimon. And the north, it's Egin or Egin. And you will find that these names have been switched around by some grimoires, and other grimoires have got it right. But that's the correct arrangement. So the directions. So we did the sort of directions in Tartarus, but this is external directions. And you can see that northwest is attributed, it is called Stilbon or Frigicab. Peterson quite often refers to Frigicab. And it's the home of Mercury. Now, we're not talking about positions in the sky. We're talking about standing in the middle of the circle. If you wanted to call Mercury, you would look to the northwest. And then in the west, which is Occidens in Latin, you might wish to call one of the female goddesses Persephone or Diana, because the west is the traditional home of the moon. The southwest, which is several different names like Nogaham and Nogomales, is the place of residence of Venus or Hesperus. And so if you wish to call a Venusian spirit, then the southwest is the best direction to look at if you don't have the particular details of that spirit. And then going up to the north is Saturn. And I can understand that because the north is colder. We worry about the southern hemisphere some of the time. In the center, you've got Mauna Maria, and it just says God there, but Nathaniel is the entity, and there's no planet in the center. In the south, Latin is Merides, and the planet is Mars. So if you wanted to whip up some martial magic, facing the south is the best alternative to knowing the exact direction of the spirit. Now the north, I've just got the Latin there, but there's no entity and there's no planet, and that's because the northeast, because the northeast is the demon gate. Whether that's where they come in or go out, I'm not sure, but it has not got any planet in there. The east, where you might call Apollo or Phoebus from, is sacred to the sun. And why the sun? Well, the sun rises in the east. It's a pretty obvious attribution. And the southeast, which has the strange Latin name of Cossol or Cossilianus, is the home of Jupiter. Now, the only reason why this is here is that in the text of the Summa, frequently these words are used instead of southeast, northeast, etc. In most cases, I put the southeast, northeast, east, west, north, south in brackets, but I haven't perhaps always done that. So I have taken you through various different things which have come from the Summa. The table of practice is perhaps one of the most important. but the various other things I touched upon are also important. And I believe I have now been talking for an hour. And, yeah, an hour. So I think I'll give up here and ask if there are any questions.
Yeah.
I can see that this questioner has been doing more than his homework. Um, so it's a hell of a large question because you've dragged all of those things in. But with regards, let's start with Arabic. Yes, there was Arabic, particularly in the Balearic Islands, um, and also in what's the island at the foot of Italy. Um, and but as I may or may not have mentioned before, Raymond Lull also was a Catalan and lived roughly at the same time as Ganelli. And I think somebody wanted to do a bit of research to check if they met would be very interesting. Raymond Lull is normally seen as an alchemist, but a lot of his alchemical stuff is spurious. But he's definitely got a knowledge of magic, and he's definitely got a knowledge of Arabic. And why has he got a knowledge of Arabic? It's because he wanted to go and Christianize and convert all of the Arabs of North Africa. I think that is one hell of an ambition, and I would never think of doing that. But so he made numerous trips to North Africa and must have known Arabic to get away with it. Got jailed, beaten up, chucked out of one country or another, and finally gave up trying to Christianize Muslims. But he came back with a knowledge of Arabic, and it's possible that that's where um, Ganelli's Arabic came from. I only say possible because of the matching things like both being Catalan, both living in the same part of near Perpignan. Um, I'm going to skip the rest of the questions because my brain is a bit tired and they're far too detailed for this conversation. Agrippa published 300 years after Ganelli, used some of the stuff from Ganelli, but also from other sources. But so I wouldn't put it next to Agrippa because Agrippa is 300 years later. And I wouldn't put it next to the Lucidarium either. Do I have to put them on the same shelf? I put them on the same shelf because they're all Solomonic magic, but beyond that, I would not worry about who is rubbing shoulders with whom. Is it a survey of magic? No, it's an accumulation of magic. It has stuff drawn from mostly the same source, which is the 12th century Solomon. Um, it's consistent in as much as it's not different systems. It did not bring in any astrologic stuff. Um, so I would say it's more like a compendium, which is what I used in the title. Um, does that answer the question? I hope so. Either you can look at it as a dumbing down or making it more efficient by taking out all this additional stuff. But if you go back to the idea of gate opening, uh, these are full sets to open the necessary gates. Maybe the magicians concerned discovered that you could get by with just archangel names, and so they didn't bother to copy all that out. I think that's probably what happened. So I can say something which will piss off a few people. and that is that the Kabbalistic stuff, like the Tree of Life, etc., only entered the magical sphere a lot later. Jewish magicians may have been using it, but I don't think so. I noticed one fake grimoire where they introduced Kabbalistic stuff because they thought it should be there, but it isn't, and that was a giveaway. I can't remember the exact manuscript name, but anyway, no, the Kabbalah is for mystical stuff and for dealing with God and doing complicated calculations to prove things that are not equal are equal. They're not part of magic. I've heard of Terence McKenna because everybody has, but I don't understand what you said by the set of letters. But I presume that they're entities that he's conjured under drug influence or something. But as you can hear, I'm out of my depths there. So for saying whether they're the same as the ones that Solomonic magicians would have conjured, I can't really say. There are thousands of spirits. I'm not sure whether spirits die after a certain period of time, but I know that some spirits in some grimoires don't work anymore. It doesn't matter how much welly I give them, they don't come. So there is a loss there. And maybe some of the newer spirits find that coming through drug-induced clarity is easier. But I don't know. I'm an old-fashioned magician, not a modern one. Although in my youth, I did experiment, of course. I'm not going to deny that. I used to organize rock bands, and I published a couple of underground newspapers, which faded away and don't exist anymore. But I haven't made all the connections that Terence McKenna has. No, no, I don't think they do. I think there's too much of this. We've got 9 of these and 9 of those, so they must correspond. The 9 orders of angels can correspond with perhaps the 7 or 9 spheres around the Earth. That's fairly straightforward. But the geography of Tartarus is not connected. Of that I'm pretty sure. But I can ask if you like. Well, now I'm back on familiar territory. The PGM is a great, well, I can't call it, I could call it Solomonic, but that wouldn't be quite true. But yes, it has a hierarchy. The entities are not the same as the ones conjured by what we're looking at on the screen, but there's definitely a straightforward development from the PGM through to the Summa. But the difference is the PGM is what, 2nd and 3rd century AD, and the Summa is 13th, 14th century AD. So there's a good 1,000 years in between. So tracing that, I leave that to somebody else who's got more time than I have. Yeah, there's obviously a connection because those entities do come through, and the method is somewhat similar. There's hierarchy in both methods, but I wouldn't like to say that there's definite connection between this PGM entity and this spirit. However, some spirits, like Boel, who features in half a dozen PGM things, also features in medieval grimoires. And so I was quite shocked by that Boel and his piece of cloth still seems to have the same personality as he did back in the PGM period. So this is a positive connection that I can definitely quote you. But somebody should research that. Boel is a very interesting entity. I don't like to publish anything that I haven't done some experimentation with. And so, yes, I have experimented with this. And all I can say is that some things didn't work at all, but others worked very rapidly. We're not talking a month or a week. We're talking the same night or the next day, even in some cases. So that was very pleasing. Um, so yeah, thumbs up for it as a practical method. Well, no, the answer is if you're not getting cooperation, then things become a lot harder and more difficult. Um, but you don't get oh yeah, that's good, thumbs up for you. It's just a question of going through the different levels. And if you don't meet resistance, then the gates are opening for you. Yeah. Well, if you look at some of the grimoires, they say, oh, that's because this area is, I can't remember, north is by this demon and west is by that demon and so forth. And so you get, which one of the more recent grimoires, which even give the demon in charge of America as different from the demon in charge of Africa, as different from the demon in charge of Northern Europe, which is possible, I guess. Um, well, I think that um, as my original training was a geographer, I think that direction is very important. As my other interest, which is classical feng shui, is positively obsessed by direction. I just find it obvious that it should be. Um, what are the other things that you can tie the spiritual world with the physical world apart from direction? Incense, color, maybe. Um, but uh, yeah, I can go further than that. I can say that if you're trying to conjure a spirit facing in the opposite direction to which it's going to arrive, it will get pissed off. They don't like to be shown your back. It's a matter of etiquette. So as direction is important to the spirits from that point of view, then direction is also important to magic. It's also an easy thing to measure. Uh, Given a compass, you're all done, as it were. But some of the more complicated grimoires will give fairly precise directions, not north, not west, but northwest, or even northwest can be divided into three, and it's the third part of northwest that you need to face. Um, and just from experience, observing the right direction works. Observing the wrong direction um, doesn't work. Uh, so obviously the spirits have something about direction that's important. And a number of grimoires talk about the spirits living in a particular direction. So that's true also. I hope that answers it. I'm not sure it does, but anyway. Okay. If you're talking to somebody and his name is Jacques, he's French. If you call him Jack, he will still answer you. If you call him Sophie, he won't. But if you get sort of close to his name, he will answer you. And I think that's part of the thing. It's like we might invoke in English, which is not necessarily the spirit's native language, but they get the message and they will do the particular task that we're passing to them. So yes, I've tried to rectify those. In fact, I have rectified those conjurations for my own benefit, but I haven't published that. And I'm sure that other people will, once they've got the chart, as it were, in front of them of Tartarus, then they can tell what other demons are in that sector and can be useful in that working. So yes, and the rather smudgy conjurations can be sorted out. It's ongoing work, and then it'll be better. As indeed, I found that if I've sorted it out a little bit, it is definitely better. Yeah, it does. Ganelli's home language is Latin, so that figures. Ganelli also uses the letters of the Latin alphabet for preference rather than any of the others, although he uses all of them. I think the passage you're talking about comes out of the fourth book, doesn't it? That he translated. And I have read it quickly, but I haven't paid enough attention to it, nor have I checked um, the number correspondences. So I'm underbriefed on that. Well, I think of it from the opposite direction. I think that working with spirits is a little bit like taming animals. So, for example, I have a friend who's really into horses, and she explains the mechanics of taming a horse so that the horse then becomes your your particular animal. And there seems to be a lot of parallels, and I think the spirits do like some communication with humans. Of course, some guys or girls will offer them sacrifices. There will be. I am happy with offering them incense, and they definitely like incense. And offering the wrong incense has a negative effect. In fact, you can drive spirits away by burning something really very stinky. Um, a beautiful incense will make an atmosphere that they can live in or manifest in much easier. It's not a question of the smoke, as Mathis and Crowley thought. It's a question of the actual smell, which is why in Egyptian temples you would not be allowed in if you'd been eating garlic or fish, because both of those things can have nasty smells. And then the gatekeeper in the temple just wouldn't let you in. So there's no way of double checking that. Um, so I think they know that humans can provide them with some nice things. They've probably also got some interest in what we have to say. It's like some of the spirits are said to have expertise in geometry or geodesy or whatever else. So there's obviously an intellectual element there. I have to say I've never asked a spirit, why do you bother to come? Because that sounds rather demotivating. I always work with the attitude, well, of course you came, which isn't always true, of course. They don't always come. There can always be some reason why not, like bad weather outside, for example, will make it very difficult to conjure some of the more delicate spirits. Um, yeah, so sacrifices, incense, even conversation. Uh, and then you've got to ask the spirits who don't come, why didn't you come? And because they haven't come, you can't ask them. So that's a problem. Um, does that answer the question? A little bit.
Yeah.
Yes, you think you might be disappointed that the book hasn't come. Well, I can tell you I'm very disappointed that the book hasn't come. And I apologize for that. because this may not be my fault, but it's the fault of the people I've hired to do particular jobs, because I do look after all the printing and packing and shipping as well, as if I didn't have enough to do otherwise. So my apologies for that. And I will come in to sign if anybody wants me to scribble on the book. Oh, talking about scribbling on the book, I don't know whether you noticed, but on John Dee's copies, yeah, top right-hand corner, the L2 F8 F15 was D. He went through the whole manuscript and scribbled on every single leaf, both sides, so he could find his way around it. And he also did a few other scribbles, which is why I'm pretty sure he was right pissed off when he had to sell it. But he was obviously offered a very attractive amount of money for doing so. Well, we know that in 1508, Trithemius had it. Then Trithemius was forced out of the abbey that he was the abbot of, and pushed into a much smaller one, because the church was probably getting a little bit fed up with his interest in magic. And so the monks left in his old abbey promptly started selling the books off. They thought, well, we don't want to read these, but by God, there's a lot of money there, and we can have life a bit more comfortable if we were to sell them. So I think somewhere very rapidly after 1508, the books were sold. And then Dee had the habit of going around monasteries, particularly ones that are being closed down, and picking up books, and so that happened. But you asked me which monastery, I have no idea. Okay, well, the secret is that I have a list of books that I think need to be created or published, and it's slightly more than 20 books long. And the one that attracts me at the moment, or gets closer to being printed, is the one that gets done. So, but at the moment, my priority is to finish the work on the other three books. Two have been published of the Summa in one volume, and the second volume will pick up the other three, I hope. And I'm still working on that. So it's an ongoing thing. I've produced more books this year than I have for a long time. There's another book called, what's it called? Magical Art? No. Which is on Amazon, but without any fanfare. It's just sitting there. And that was something I did rather rapidly, simply because it came to hand. Anyway, so going back to it, yes, of my 20-odd books on the list, these will come out as and when they get close to being finished. That way it doesn't drive me mad, because I can flip around from one book to the next until one becomes favorite, and then I push that through until it's done. So I can't give you specifics on timing or books or whatever else, but the one that she spoke about, that's very close to finished. Maybe that's a hint that I should do that one after I finish the full Summa Sacra. Good idea. Okay. Anyway, listen, thank you for having me. I hope I didn't bore too many people rabbiting on about the Summa, but it is a book close to my heart, because I have never seen such a large grimoire which accumulates so many things that I sometimes wondered about, but I now see answered in the book. And that's not a plug to buy it, because it's a plug to me to get on with it and finish it. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you.